Hey everyone, I'm Jules Leahy. In today's video, we're going to Dumbleize my 1968 Fender Super Reverb amp. This amp is actually fairly new to me, although it's been around for quite a while. I bought it a few months ago, and as soon as I did buy it, my good friend Philbillie wanted me to come over to his place so that he could Dumbleize it. So let's go over to Philbillie's, take a peek at what he did to my amp. But first, I'd like to invite everybody watching this to check out my masterclass courses. Most specifically, we were just released a Derek Trucks masterclass course, which is over 2 hours of in-depth detail breaking down Derek's slide techniques, both techniques that he generally uses. We transcribe recordings from his records that are just fantastic, some live material we go over, and I'm just really proud of this course. I know that you'll get a ton out of it. These masterclass courses help fuel everything that we're doing and keep the lights on, quite literally, over here on my YouTube channel. So if you appreciate what I'm doing, I know you're gonna dig those masterclass courses. All right, now let's go over to Philbillie's and see what he did with my Super Reverb. So we're here with Phil to talk about what he did to Dumbleize my 68 Super Reverb. So first of all, I think when you drop the name Alexander Dumble, that's no light name to throw around in the guitar amp world.
No, it's highly loaded, and it's quite legendary, and there's a lot of information about there and a lot of disinformation. Over the last few months, I've actually come to learn a great deal about the process, who he was, and how I could apply that to my repairs and my upgrades for my customers.
So I guess at that point, let's throw the amp up and take a peek at it, and maybe you can walk us through what you did.
Yeah, we'll put it up on the slab and see what's what. This is quite a beautiful example. Blackface Super Reverb amplifier. The blackface denotes, for those that may not quite understand, that this was built before CBS bought Fender. Most people believe that these are the superior models, although in all honesty, in the transition, there was not a lot of big differences, but still the perception remains. We're going to turn this around so we can get access to it, and we'll just take a few screws out and pop the chassis out. Get out the, what we call the Stormtrooper. Keep everything nice and neat. Nothing worse than losing a customer's parts, believe me. Unplug the speaker and the reverb tank. Gonna take out the rectifier tube just so it doesn't get damaged. And now the part where the angels sing and the skies open up. Ta-da! So what we're looking at here now is the inside guts of this beautiful 1968 Blackface Super Reverb. This came off the line, was built in Fullerton, California back in the day. And the thing about these amplifiers is that they were put together on an assembly line with components that were state-of-the-art for the day. But those components, for instance, we're talking about resistors and capacitors here mainly, they had tolerances from their stated values as much as 20%. That means if we have a 100K resistor in a certain spot, it could measure anything in reality from 80K all the way to 120. Now, if you've got 100 components going into a board out of the parts bins and you put them all in there, they're going to add up to an amplifier that sounds a certain way. That is why in the aggregate you have a situation where two amplifiers coming off the assembly line back then right next to each other sound completely different. One can sound kind of fine and the other one can have maybe what we call today mojo, because it just added up to something that worked really well. But what we're doing today is what hot rodders call blueprinting. We're going to replace those components with modern components that are not only made of better materials, but they also have tolerance as little as 1 to 5%. That means if we put in the values what they're supposed to be, the amplifier is now going to behave quieter, but it's also going to behave in the way that God and Leo Fender intended. The components back in the day were made from different materials, and as I said, they had a much lower tolerance in terms of how much they could vary in their values. What we're using now is we're using metal film resistors and we're using polypropylene capacitors. The polypropylene has been chosen to have what's called a low effective series resistance. It just means when the electrons are moving through it, it's much more efficient. They're not crashing into each other, which basically adds up to cause heat and therefore noise. They have a really, really nice sonic character to them. They're very pure, and the signal goes through pretty much unmolested, and they also tend to give you a much more open, airy sound. I liken it to kind of pulling the veil off the whole thing. And again, I would like to reiterate that this is all in the aggregate. So changing just one of these, you may not notice anything at all. But when we do everything in the whole circuit, we're talking about the whole preamp circuit, and then also the components having to do with the power amp circuit, as well as upgrading the power supply. It all adds up to something better. Another thing that we do as a part of this upgrade is all of these solder joints in here, they were 50 years old. The metals in there, they tend to oxidize and crystallize over the years. So what I'll do is go in there, suck out all the old solder, and I'm using a much more modern, higher grade silver alloy solder. So that all adds up too, because we're talking about, as you can see, several dozen solder joints. Even if I'm not replacing the component, I'm redoing the solder joints. That also includes points where ground is going onto the chassis. So I'll redo all of those, make sure that everything is super tight. That adds up to our reliability and hopefully the sonics. Now we've come to call this a Dumbleization, and you may wonder what qualifies me to call it that and what that actually means. Alexander Howard Dumble was a pretty legendary amplifier technician and builder back in the 80s and 90s. He passed away just about 4 or 5 years ago. And since then, of course, his amplifiers, the ones that he hand built, are going for, over $200,000. I personally have had the opportunity to examine several of his amplifiers, the ones not only that he built, but also Fenders such as this that he modified. I have a new client on Maui named Bob Rock. You can look him up. He produced an album you might have heard of called Metallica's Black Album, and he possesses several of these, and was also a good friend of Alexander's, and he very generously allowed me to get into and inspect. So I have seen what it is that Alexander did, and these are also things that I had been doing over the years myself in my repairs, and this allowed me to kind of put it all together and crystallize or codify what went into what Howard later, came to be doing on his amplifiers. So what that boils down to is the component upgrades that I talked about, changing out all the soldering and making sure that everything is as sound as it can be. And that is really it in a nutshell. But I should also mention out that we have chosen not to go and change out absolutely everything, because we've determined that there's some things that are more critical than others in terms of the upgrade. And in the interest of saving a little bit of time and money, not completely everything has been done. For instance, all of these wires here, it would be advantageous to go ahead and replace that with a more modern, higher grade type of wire, but it would also be talking about another 8 to 10 hours of work. So we're doing a little trade-off here, just so you understand. So what I'm pointing out now is the components that go into our vibrato channel, which has got treble, middle, bass, reverb, and vibrato controls. If we start right here, these components here, these are electrolytics, and they're called cathode bypass, and these are responsible for the basic, along with the resistors in here, the basic frequency response and gain of these two gain stages. These are tone stack caps, and these have been changed also to a modern polypropylene type. These are also, oddly enough, called orange drops. They just happen to be one brand of polypropylenes, and they're very good and widely available. This is part of the tone stack as well. This is the coupling between stages. So the deal is that the values of the capacitors are very, very responsible for the frequency response of the amplifier. So by changing these values or tweaking them a little bit or a lot, you can actually tune the amplifier's frequency response to the desires of the individual player. It is said that he would listen to the player and then go in and modify the amplifier just based on what he heard, and come up with an amplifier that worked exactly well for that player and his style. I have chosen to keep these values stock, and Jules is very, very happy with the amplifier as it is, but we may get into doing a little bit of tweaking as our relationship goes on. Over in this section here, these are all having to do with the power section. So those are common to the preamp of the power amplifier. So it affects everything that goes through the amplifier and comes up to this point. So those are done as well. So I hope you get a little better idea of what basically goes into these things and what we can do to make them even better. The word mojo's kicked around a whole lot, and a lot of people feel that modifying a blackface like this is sacrilegious. In my opinion, the mojo is right in here and right here, and Jules has got lots of it. The amplifier is just a tool, and so I'm here to make that tool work for the artist. So I'm going to pop this back together, button it up, and then Jules is going to go back to the studio. We're going to mic it up properly, and you'll get to hear what it really sounds like.
All right, so now that we know the rundown of what Philbillie actually did to this amp, let's check it out. I have just my two hands, my good old slide here, my liquid slide, and my SG. And this is a specific rig. I wanted to try this rig out in particular because this is kind of like the Derek Trucks rig. You know, a super cranked up, it's turned on to 10, the volume is at 10. It's not dimed, the EQ is, you know, they're not all at 10, but it's at a place where I feel like it sounds really good. And so all I'm going to be doing now is controlling the volume of the guitar from the pots on the guitar, right? So, and that's kind of the most ideal situation. Rather than having 6 stop boxes providing our distortion, this is the good old-fashioned way, you know, as it was sort of meant to be, as the rock gods intended, right? So let's give this a whirl. I'm going to start by just playing, and one of the things that I notice when I'm actually playing this amp now is that it's very sensitive to what volume we're on. So I'm going to work our way up to 10, but let's start with the volume knob just at about like 2 or 3. I'm going to be on the neck pickup here, and I'm at like 2.5. So let's see how this sounds first. And as I said, I'm working my way up to 10, but wanted to show you kind of the dynamic range this amp offers now. So classic, just clean Fender, you know, I can dig in really hard and it's not really gonna break up yet, which is great. I love having that clean sound down there ready for me all day, right? Now let's work up towards, I'm gonna go up to 5, and let's see how 5 sounds. Again, I'm expecting this to be pretty clean, a little more full, but we're not quite breaking up yet. You know, this is like, this is what's so beautiful about having your amp wide open, and you get all of the response from just, you know, the slightest change in where your volume pot is set. So here's 5 now. Let's hear how that sounds. All right, so again, you know, it's just nice and clean. It's getting more meaty, it's getting more overdriven, but it's still plenty clean. Now, let's inch our way up closer to the promised land. This is now 7.5, okay? Let's hear how 7.5 sounds. So you can hear there's, you know, more meat on the bone. It's still not super broken up, but I'm really liking everything that I'm hearing. Now, as promised, the promised land, here it is. This is 10. So the amp is on 10 in there. The guitar volume is on 10 in here. This is as broken up as it's going to get with just plugging your guitar right into the Super. Check out how this sounds. Here we go. Now the same thing, I'm just changing up to the bridge pickup. Here's the same thing, 10 and 10. Now I'm just going to hang out here for a sec. I love this tone. Working our way up is a cool way of, you know, it might take a sec. You might go, what's going on here? It sounds normal. But when you hear how clear that tube distortion is with the amp in its happy place, cranked all the way up, now it's getting the most info from the guitar. I'm just going to stay here for a sec and show you how, by the touch that I put in now, with it on 10, I can still get a very clean tone. Or if I, you know, dig in, it can have that bite that I really like. So now, just without changing the volume at all, here's a dynamic range. You know, here's the dynamic range available to us by just changing the touch that I use when I'm playing. So there you have it, folks. That's the Fender 1968 Super Reverb amp, Dumbleized by Philbillie himself. This is, to me, my best sounding amp. I'm kind of new to vintage gear, actually. I haven't really had very much vintage gear. So to have a really special piece of rock and roll history with that 68 Super Reverb, something I've always wanted, and now to have it Dumbleized by Philbillie. This is a really special piece of gear. I hope you enjoyed the little tour Obviously, this is just sort of barely scratching or sniffing the surface of what this thing has. This is just the guitar and an amp. But now as a pedal platform, it's amazing. You know, it works just, it's really such a great amp. I'd say the downside of it might be its size. You know, for a little guy like me, the amp's like half my size, for crying out loud. So it's a little tough to bring around to gigs, but man, the sound is worth it. I want to thank Philbillie for Dumbleizing my amp. He's just a great guy. He does really great work. We have his contact info in the video description below. He's into doing this work for people. So if you want your amp Dumbleized, or if you want a mod of any type, he's a great guy to call. So reach out to Philbillie. And thank you guys so much for checking out this video today. We have a ton of videos like this. We have masterclass courses available. Purchasing those masterclass courses makes all of our YouTube channel possible. So your support really goes a long way. Really appreciate it. I'll catch you in the next video. Hey, how's it going, everybody? I'm Jules Leahy. I'm thrilled to announce that my Derek Trucks Slide Guitar Masterclass is now available. This class is over 2 hours of in-depth study of Derek Trucks' greatest licks, his signature sounds. Everything that you're going to learn in this course is designed to make you a better player and ultimately make you sound more like yourself. I'm a Berklee College of Music graduate and a professional musician of the last 15 years. I've shared the stage with Buddy Guy, Jimmy Vaughn, Chris Kane, and a slew of other blues greats. They've taken me under their wing and have taught me so many things that I want to now share with you guys. Check the link in my bio or julesleahymusic.com to get your Derek Trucks Slide Guitar Masterclass today.